in the legislative session, and a lot of groups are stepping up their efforts now to get various bills passed before lawmakers head home. On top of the priority list for the New York State Law Enforcement Council is the expansion of the state's DNA database. Now, in the past decade, the state has been able to solve more crimes thanks to this mandatory DNA sample requirement for convicted felons. Also, they've been able to turn around a lot of wrongful convictions with this evidence. Now, the council would like to extend the law so all crimes are covered. Anyone who is convicted of any misdemeanor, any felony, is required to give DNA. Joining me to talk now more about this is Richard Aborn, the president of the Citizens Crime Commission of New York City, which is the only not-for-profit group that sits on the Law Enforcement Council. Richard, thanks very much for your time.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so this seems a little bit like a no-brainer. It's interesting that, for example, all of the misdemeanor crimes were not included when the DNA database was created at the outset. Why is that?
Well, we've been slowly expanding it since its inception. Originally, it was designed just to take DNA samples from people convicted of very violent felonies, homicides, rapes, robberies, kidnappings. But then we began to realize that people that commit those crimes tend to commit lower-level offenses earlier in their career, and that there would be great advantage to taking DNA samples from, say, people who did fare beating and committed petit larceny, because very often those people will go on to commit violent felonies, and we can stop them from being serial offenders. So we've expanded the DNA data bank once in 2006 to include all felonies and some misdemeanors, and now we'd like to go all the way and include all crimes upon conviction.
And we should be clear here that what we're talking about is, and just as you just said, upon conviction, because
Correct.
I could see that civil libertarians would be a little bit concerned at the outset that if you're just arrested and had to give a swab, it's usually coming out of your cheek, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
Right?
It's a very non-intrusive thing to do. It's a very easy swab to take. And I do understand the concerns around civil liberties, but in many ways you could treat DNA like a 21st century fingerprint. And if there is an arrest and then there's a subsequent acquittal, much like with a fingerprint, you could destroy the DNA sample. But we're not talking about taking DNA on arrest now. We're talking about taking DNA on conviction, but for all crimes. And again, the goal is to not only rapidly convict those who commit horrendous violent offenses, but frankly to rapidly acquit or remove from the system those who have been wrongfully arrested. Why not use the DNA to save somebody the horror of going through a criminal justice proceeding, a trial and a sentencing, only to subsequently find out they're innocent, when we can use DNA to do that rapidly? And that's our goal.
This actually requires legislation, of course,
it does.
And it also requires the governor to sign off.
It does.
At this point, where are you in that whole process of getting a bill made a law in Albany?
We are looking for what we call a clean bill, which means a bill that focuses only on the collection of DNA for all convictions. We're not looking for it to be attached to a lot of other things. We are speaking with both the House and the Assembly. We will certainly be speaking with the governor's office, and we'd like to see it happen in this session. This is a pure public safety bill. This should not be a partisan bill. There is not that much cost attached to this, and the savings in lives are substantial, and the savings in wasted lives, those who are wrongfully arrested, is substantial. So this is a win-win for everybody, and we think it's time the legislature complete what it started in 2006 and take this to the all crimes level.
Yeah, you know, there are actually a lot of discussions right now about the creation of databases. In fact, there was just yesterday the Senate Republicans were talking about creating a database for example, felony convictions, violent felonies. We already have one, a sex offender registry, thanks to Megan's Law. I mean, is this something that you imagine eventually will be completely integrated and computerized? It seems in the 21st century it all should be, but it's not.
Sure. The technology is there to take these samples and integrate them into the database that already exists, and that database is relatively easily searchable. And I tell you, it's not only a New York State database, it also goes into a federal data bank, so that if a criminal from New York goes to an adjoining state, or any state for that matter, and commits an offense, that state will be aware of that person's identity as well. So this is a absolutely easy thing to do. There were great pleas the last time asking us not to do this because it would overwhelm the system. None of that came to pass. We easily worked through the new samples, and we can easily work through the new samples that we've taken under this bill as well.
I'd actually like to catch up, just before I let you go, with another issue that you've been working on, and that is a ban on high-capacity or high-caliber magazines.
Yes.
This is, of course, related again to the Gabrielle Giffords shooting. We just saw her make a semi-public appearance while she saw her husband blast off into space there, and it brings back the issue to the forefront. Where does that stand now, and where's your situation in Washington with this bill?
So I've been working on gun control issues for a long time, and I know that none of these are easy. Gun control is always a tough fight, and you've got to work in a number of sessions to get them done. So I'm actually pleased about where this bill is going. We now have more co-sponsors than we thought we would have at this point. It's gone to the Committee on Terror in the House, which is exactly where it belongs, because these are weapons of terror. These are weapons that are used in mass murders. In fact, every single mass murder that's been committed in the United States, where 5 or more people have been killed in the last 20 years, one of these large magazines have been used. In fact, I now call them assault clips. Let's stop calling them by the antiseptic name large magazines. These are assault clips, and these are designed to kill a lot of people rapidly, whether it's Virginia Tech or Columbine or any of the other shootings that place, including Binghamton. No matter what shooting you see, it's these large magazines that are used. Let's get rid of these assault clips once and for all.
And so that committee that you're speaking of is actually Pete King's committee. That's a New York committee, if you will. It's headed by a New Yorker. He's a Republican. And he has been talking about not gun control per se. I wouldn't be surprised to see him move on this particular issue because it's so high profile right now. But it is moving with baby steps in Washington. And I understand there's going to be some news coming out soon, so we will be keeping an eye out for that.
Please stay tuned.
We will indeed. I want to thank you very much, Richard Aborn, for coming on. It's great to see you.
Always a pleasure, Liz. Always.